Good afternoon, grade 12. I hope you're doing well. I hope your lessons are going well. And we can be glad at least that lockdown hasn't been extended as such, not under the current terms. So we wait for our ministers to announce what will be happening in terms of each department, each province, etc. So make sure you're keeping your eye on the news. So what I wanted to do today with you is to just go through a couple of exam questions, typical exam questions, the things that they're going to ask you, whether it's a test or whether it's trial exams. These types of questions come up all the time. So I've started with 2.1 on your class questions that I sent yesterday on the group. So first of all, they give you a graph. A to C is average total costs. So the curve you see there that looks like a smile, remember we know it as AC. AC is the same as ATC. Remember that total costs are made up of fixed and variable costs. So they can also label it ATC or AC. So first of all, what can we notice? They've shown us that it's an economic loss. We could have also established that by looking at the average cost curve in relation to your marginal revenue, average revenue curve. So at equilibrium, average cost is above average revenue, which means it's an economic loss. Okay, so moving on to the questions. First, 2.1.1, identify the market structure in the graph above. So as I've explained when we're going through perfect markets, the curves that we look at to establish what type of market structure is your revenue curves. Cost curves stay the same for the businesses, but your revenue curves. So if we look, we only have one revenue curve, and it's a horizontal line. A horizontal line implies that it's a price taker, so it has to be a perfect market. So that's your answer to 2.1.1. 2.1.2, the value of the market price. Remember, the market price is the revenue that the business is receiving. So your market price, you look at what level is the revenue curve on. That is at a price of 50 Rand. So all you have to do, answer 2.1.2, 50 Rand. Please make sure that you always include the units. So have a look at the graph and see which unit you must use, which currency. Moving on to the next question, how will this equilibrium position change in the long run? Remember, perfect markets in the long run will only make normal profit. So what will happen here is firms that are making this economic loss, they will start to shut down, which means our supply will decrease, the market price will increase up to a point where eventually, in the long run, all the firms are making a normal profit. Okay, 2.1.4. What conditions must exist for this firm to shut down? Now we are looking at shutdown point. So your shutdown point is where your marginal revenue is below your average variable costs. So average variable costs must be greater than marginal revenue. Make sure you mention variable costs, not total costs, average variable costs. Then if we look at calculate the economic loss faced by this firm, very important, the calculations, as you can see, it's 4 marks. So what do we have to do? The profit or loss, excuse my writing again, is equal to your total revenue, the amount of money you receive, minus your total cost. So total revenue is average revenue multiplied by quantity, and your total costs is average cost multiplied by quantity. We can simplify this equation and just say average revenue minus average cost times quantity. So now what we have to do is we have to look at the graph and we have to figure out those amounts. So here's equilibrium, point E, where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So our average revenue at equilibrium is going to be 50. Remember, MR is equal to AR is equal to D. Don't let it confuse you if they don't label it completely correctly. So the average revenue is 50 Rand. Your average revenue is also equal to the market price. Now to figure out my average cost, I have to draw a dotted line up to the average cost curve. So at point F is where you read off the average cost at equilibrium, which is a value of 90. And the quantity at equilibrium, you read off this axis, 100. 50 minus 90, negative 40, multiplied by 100, gives you negative 4,000. It's negative because we're making an economic loss. So you can always check that by checking the position of your average cost curve as well. We already discussed earlier that it is above the average revenue curve, so it should be an economic loss. And they've told you in the question as well. So that's 2.1. I'm going to do another question with you. 2.4 on your questions. Here are the answers for you nicely. I will send you all the answers later today. There's all the answers. You can pause the video and mark. So moving on to 2.4. Okay, so first of all, again, just to set the scene for yourself, to understand what the graph is about, always figure out what market structure is it, number one, and is it a profit or a loss that the business is making. Regardless of what questions they're going to ask you, it's just easier to answer the questions if you know what market structure you're dealing with and what profit situation you're dealing with. So, if we have a look here, there's only one revenue curve, and therefore it's again perfect market. And if we look at equilibrium, equilibrium is where MC equals MR. So there's equilibrium. At equilibrium, your average cost curve, your smile curve, is above your revenue curve, which means average cost is greater than average revenue, which means they are making an economic loss. Right, so let's go to the questions. What is the visible relationship between the MC and the AC curves? The visible relationship is that MC cuts the AC curve at the lowest point of the AC curve. Sorry. So this MC, the smile curve, goes through the average cost curve at the lowest part of the smile. So when you draw it, make sure you draw it that way. 2.4.2, define the term economic loss. An economic loss is, as we've explained, when your average costs are greater than your average revenue, which means the business is not able to cover all their costs and they're making a loss. 2.4.3, why is the demand curve of the individual producer horizontal? Remember, the demand curve is your revenue curve or your average revenue curve. So the average revenue curve of a perfect competitor is flat because they are price takers. They cannot influence the market price because there are so many competitors that not one of the competitors has enough influence to influence the market price. Calculate the economic loss. So, obviously, first step is to find equilibrium. We've done that. So now all we have to do, profit equals AR minus AC, or average revenue minus average cost, multiplied by the quantity. Excuse my writing, I'm really not good at this. So average revenue at equilibrium, remember we read off this axis. So, and off our revenue curve. So our average revenue is 10. To find our average cost, we look at equilibrium, draw a dotted line up to the average cost curve. At this point, we read across, so our average cost is 15. 10 minus 15 multiplied by your equilibrium quantity. Your equilibrium quantity is what we read off the x-axis, which is 50. So 10 minus 15, negative 5, multiplied by 50 gives you negative 250, meaning the firm is making a 250 rand or unit loss. I see they haven't given you a unit here, so it would just be rand. That's all your calculations. So I'm going to move it on to the next slide so you can mark. But those are the typical questions you'll get apart from the theory. Next week I'm going to be starting with imperfect markets. So the best thing for you to do this weekend is to recap your characteristics of imperfect markets as well. Monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly. And then during next week we can finish our imperfect markets. Enjoy your weekend. Remember, it's a long weekend, so we're not working on Monday. Take a break, replenish yourself, get your energy back up, and hopefully soon we'll be back in the classroom. Enjoy your weekend, grade 12.